In his groundbreaking 1969 monograph, Toward a General Theory of the Paranormal, later revised and published as The Medium, the Mystic, and the Physicist, three worlds converge in what LeShan, collaborating both experimentally and theoretically with one of the most gifted and vetted psychics of the last century, Eileen Garrett, called the Clairvoyant Reality. The title his book was published under in the UK. LeShan introduced millions to meditation with his 1974 bestseller, How to Meditate. And the clairvoyant reality can be seen as the ultimate realization that meditation can bring, as it has for enlightened beings through millennia. While I urge you all to get a copy of The Medium, the Mystic, and the Physicist, I will share with you the 8 challenges that the clairvoyant reality makes to common sense. Challenges that are the key to making second sight less weird. 1. Individual identity is essentially illusory. 2. Information is known through the knower and object, being part of the same unitary pattern. 3. Time is without division, and past, present, and future are illusory. 4. What is, and is neither good nor evil, but a part of the totally harmonious plan of the cosmos, which, by its very being, is above good and evil. 5. Free will does not exist, since what will be is, and the beginning and end of all enfold each other. One cannot take action, but can only participate in the pattern of things. 6. Perception cannot be externally blocked, since knowledge comes from being part of the all, and nothing can come between knower and known, as they are the same. 7. Space cannot prevent information exchange between two individual objects, since their separateness and individuality are secondary to their unity and relatedness. 8. Time cannot prevent information exchange between two individual objects, since the divisions into past, present, and future are illusions. Number 5, free will does not exist, while perhaps the least controversial of the 8 challenges to common sense, may well be the one that strikes out at us closest to home. That is, the home we seem to be living in, moment by moment. However non-weird the non-reality of free will might ultimately be, surrendering belief in free will is a formidable challenge for most. Not for mystics, of course, such as Rumi. They say, what is love? Say, the abandonment of free will. He who has not escaped out of free will, no free will has he. Or prophets, such as Jeremiah. I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. Or Protestants, such as Martin Luther. God foreknows nothing contingently, but foresees, purposes, and does all things according to his immutable, eternal, and infallible will. This thunderbolt throws free will flat and utterly dashes it to pieces. But for most, surrendering free will is not felt to be a viable option, even if defending it is also less viable than it may appear. In the book, The Volitional Brain Towards a Neuroscience of Free Will, I am the dissenting voice, with my article, A Variety of Religious Experience, William James and the Non-Reality of Free Will, based largely on James's still widely read masterpiece, The Principles of Psychology. While the details of James's disavowal of free will on psychological grounds are beyond the scope of this talk, I will mention the key interplay brought to his attention by his fellow MD philosopher Rudolf Hermann Lotz. That is, the interplay between the passive, incoming, or afferent feeling of effort being registered and the equally passive, outgoing, or efferent feeling of effort being made. Passive because what we believe to be acts of will and effort expressed through our movements are all automatic responses to arising stimuli, thoughts and feelings of unascertainable origin. Einstein is perhaps the most noteworthy of prominent theorists who reject free will, and his renowned photon entanglement thought experiment, known as the EPR paradox, accused quantum theory's foundational indeterminism as promoting an untenable, what he called spooky action at a distance. And even though Einstein's quantum thought experiment morphed into an actual quantum experiment that seemed to establish such indeterminate, spooky action, the experiment was only made possible by the essential theoretical assist of physicist John Stuart Bell, who dismissed it as proof of quantum indeterminism, affirming the possibility of its opposite. In his own words, a way to escape the inference of spooky action at a distance involves absolute determinism in the universe, the complete absence of free will. Bell's absolute deterministic, or what he himself called a super-deterministic explanation of the experimental results, has been in play among physicists ever since, especially recently. As physicist Tim Anderson put it, superdeterminism implies that there are correlations that are built into the structure of the universe that vanish when quantum effects can be neglected. It posits a universe much like Einstein's general relativistic one, a predetermined, four-dimensional structure where particles and the experiments measuring them are frozen in time like flies in amber. And, as philosopher Richard Double long ago observed, the question of why quantum indeterminacies should occur just when we manifest libertarian free will strikes me as unanswerable. But free will and a belief in independent agency are, of course, not readily surrendered, even amongst those most supportive of the reality of precognition. While Einstein not only had no problem with, but actually took deep solace in the non-reality of free will, others who equally suspect the strict linear relationship between past, present, future, such as Darrell Bem, are not ready to let go of causal agency just because future effects can manifest before their necessarily preceding causes. Rather than surrender to an acausal but radically synchronistic block universe, they argue for a second temporal causal pathway, future to present. I find retrocausation to be of no help in making precognition less weird, far preferring what one of its biggest supporters, Eric Wargo, in his book Time Loops, derides as the alternative to retrocausation, the vague acausal fog of synchronicity offered as a compromise by Carl Jung. Jung's synchronicity, whose first stimulus, he said, came from a series of dinners he had with Einstein, and which he later developed with another giant of physics, Wolfgang Pauli, is only foggy when it is compromised, when woven together with causality, as here in Jung's joint schema with Pauli. As Arthur Koestler fairly observed, Jung offers no concrete explanations how the schema is meant to work, and his comments on it are obscure. Uncompromised synchronicity, however, as Schopenhauer said of all forms of clairvoyance, is an ultimate reality, a reality he identified with Kant's noumena, rendering our common sense experience of space, time, and causality as appearance only, Kant's phenomena, and therefore synchronicity, like second sight, can be understood only metaphysically. Physically, it is an impossibility. Insofar as retrocausal explanations of second sight and synchronicity try to preserve the appearance of causality, their compromise is also a foggy mix. But there is strong reason to believe that Jung did not ultimately promote this mix. In Jung's own words, it is impossible with our present resources to explain ESP, or the fact of meaningful coincidence as a phenomenon of energy. This makes an end of causal explanation as well, for effect cannot be understood as anything except a phenomenon of energy. Therefore, it cannot be a question of cause and effect, but of a falling together in time, a kind of simultaneity. Because of this quality of simultaneity, I have picked on the term synchronicity to designate a hypothetical factor equal in rank to causality as a principle of explanation. Jung, by the way, was profoundly influenced by James and spent 2 evenings with him, mostly discussing parapsychology and the psychology of religious experience, or what Jung, in his introduction to Anila Jaffe's book, Apparitions and Precognition, called strange tales that, because they incur the odium of superstition, are generally exchanged only in secret. For a brilliant accounting of why Jung's Parmenidean Einsteinian block universe version of synchronicity has been a secret encouraged by generations of Jungians, I once again recommend Peter Kingsley, whose recent book on Jung, entitled Catafalque, reads like a commentary on these words of Jung in radical defense of his deepest insight. The latest comment about synchronicity is that it cannot be accepted because it shakes the security of our scientific foundations, as if this were not exactly the goal I am aiming at. See also Alan Combs and Mark Holland's delightful book, Synchronicity, which preserves Jung's radical vision of synchronicity rooted in the unus mundus, one world, a level of reality which, like Bohm's implicate order, forms a common foundation for both mental and physical existence. Synchronicity, second sight, and Bohm's implicate, literally folded in order, constitute a holy trinity of sorts, as we shall later see when we look at Plotinus's folding and unfolding one. A trinity formed from the same denial of causality as Jung's uncompromised synchronicity. As Bohm's collaborator and biographer F. David Peat writes in his Synchronicity book, in building the bridge between mind and matter, the notion of causality must be bypassed in favor of transformations and unfoldings. Bypassing causality, a key to accommodating second sight, has been sanctionable in the West since David Hume's groundbreaking challenge to causality's common sense existence. That no matter how many times one event follows another, custom, overwhelmingly witnessed custom, as yet to be seen as otherwise custom, is all you've definitively got, not cause and effect. Hume's challenge may well have been discussed by James and Jung in their evening together, sharing strange tales in secret. Jung, in full agreement with Hume, spoke of the merely statistical nature of causality, and James went further, asserting, the word cause is an altar to an unknown God, an empty pedestal still marking the place of a hoped-for statue. Hume's dismantling of causality earned him Isaiah Berlin's high praise, no man has influenced the history of philosophy to a deeper or more disturbing degree. But Western philosophy's deepest disturbance is Eastern religion's supremest peace. As Vivekananda affirms, the very idea of causation exists only in the phenomenal world. A Sanskrit term, kakataliya, from kaka, crow, and taliya, palm tree, refers to a coconut's falling from a tree just after a crow alights on its branch. In the classic Hindu text, Vasista's Yoga, a book which Muktananda called like nectar for aspirants of the highest beatitude, all apparent causality is kakataliya. As Hume, James, and Jung would agree, neither the succession of bird alighting, coconut falling, or any other succession entails causal doing, except for the ignorant caught up in this cause and effect tangle or deluded notion that causality is inviolably real. In Eastern texts that explicitly acknowledge the reality of second sight, like the last two classic texts we invoked, can be found an explicit, even emphatic acknowledgement of the non-reality of causation. Hence, the Physicist's yoga, even though all seems to happen, there is no creation. The one infinite consciousness alone is thought form or experience. There is no cause and effect relationship. These cause and effect are only words, not facts. Or in Longchen Rabjam's, in naturally occurring timeless awareness, the ultimate heart essence, there is no causality. As Russell Targ summed up the ultimate peace of such timeless awareness in his book Limitless Mind, our peaceful mind can learn to reside outside of time, in a place free of depression about the past, anxiety about the future, or fear of the present. Such ultimate peace, weird as it might sound to Western ears, is not a peace that surpasseth the understanding of two of its most influential thinkers, Parmenides and Einstein, but it does require us to shift from causal doers to acausal arrivers. The esteemed relativity philosopher Adolf Grünbaum, for whom time is non-objective and no more independent of perception than color, put it this way: coming into being is only coming into present awareness, opening thereby Einstein's door to the Vijnavada, or consciousness-only Buddhism, the Buddhism known as Yogacara idealism, which became a foundation of Tibetan Buddhism. As its main founder, Vasubandhu, expressed this same enlightened perspective of consciousness only. Where there is nothing to grasp, there is no more grasping. It is thus there arises the cognition which is homogeneous, without object. The tendencies to treat object and subject as distinct and real entities are forsaken. Homogenizing both subjective and objective being into present awareness, or consciousness only, is the very stuff of dreams, which nightly simulate a subject-object dualistic world. It is only when we awaken that we realize it to have been non-dual, consciousness-only consciousness coming into present awareness. As James says, if I dream of a golden mountain, it no doubt does not exist outside of the dream. But in the dream, the mountain is of a perfectly physical nature or essence. It is as physical that it appears to me. And since, as James goes on to say, hallucinations, illusions, dreams feel just like reality until you wake from them, why may not the whole world be a dream from which we haven't awakened? That the apparent myriad plurality of the whole waking world might actually be the same single-sourced monism as a dream, in which all apparent outer manifestations inhere, has been the prime insight of Eastern sages for millennia, such as the Taoist Chuang-Tzu, who asked the same question in his famous butterfly dream. A dream's single-sourced monism may be more than analogous to the single-sourced monism that James identifies as the great mystic achievement of Tatvamasi, that thou art. Not a part, not a mode of that, but identically that absolute spirit of the world. Michael Talbot concludes his holographic universe by identifying ultimate reality with this same indivisible totality of realized Hindu masters, the dream of Brahman. Masters like Lahiri Mahasaya, the guru of Sri Yukteswar, there in the upper left-hand corner, who was in turn the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, to whom Yukteswar revealed his master's deepest secret. My guru knew this world to be nothing but an objectivized dream. The match between Mahasaya's sublime belief and his sublime gaze is shared by Ramana Maharshi, who famously said, "Waking is long and a dream short. Other than this, there is no difference." The sublime gaze of those who share this monistic belief and the second sight phenomena it supports is not shared by anyone who doubles down on common sense, concrete existence. Though in fairness to Mr. Morgan's appreciation for second sight support systems, he did say, millionaires don't use astrology. Billionaires do. But even if we prefer Maharshi's enlightenment to Morgan's billions, we may well resist converting the manifold waking world into a single-sourced monism, dream or otherwise, aligning instead with Bertrand Russell, who asserted, "I share the common sense belief that there are many separate things. I do not regard the apparent multiplicity of the world as consisting merely in phases and unreal divisions of a single indivisible reality." James mostly shared this same common sense belief, except, as we shall see, when he came to consider the non-dual, consciousness-only, indivisible reality of second sight. Though non-duality is not an obliteration of differences, as Arthur Osborne makes clear in his sadly neglected 1961 book, The Future is Now. All differences, he writes, have their existence, yet are drenched in the unity of some deeper aspect. This deeper aspect unity of differences is a commonplace of mystical experiences, such as one related by a friend of Osborne's. Each blade of grass was lit from within and gave forth an essence of enchantment, harmonizing with heightened beauty in everything around me. The familiar mystical experience of everything being lit with a peculiar beauty is a trap door that drops one from the common sense of objective multiplicity. As Osborne's friend elaborates, it was as if some unknown alchemy had been at work, blending and uniting all with my own being. Light, the sibling of consciousness, is both experienced as an alchemically deeper aspect of an unchanging unity and our best metaphor for it. As the poet Shelley, who had a powerful precognition that shook him to his core, put it, "Life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity." And Altered States researcher James accepted this as not only unweird, but plausible, writing, "Suppose now that this were really so," and then wrote, "The world of natural experience may be just a time mask, shattering or refracting the one infinite thought, which is the sole reality, into those millions of finite streams of consciousness known to us as our private selves. The refraction of one eternal, infinite thought into a multiplicity of finite streams of individual thinking is not contradicted by our assumption of personal thought creation. For, as James points out in the Principles of Psychology, it is only an assumption. As he puts it, if we could say it thinks the way we say it rains, we would be speaking with a minimum of assumption. And the minimally assumed impersonal thinking in all of us, James further allows, may well be single-sourced. As he puts it, "For my own part, I confess that the moment I become metaphysical, I find the notion of some sort of an anima mundi, world soul, thinking in all of us, to be a more promising hypothesis, in spite of all its difficulties, than that of a lot of absolutely individual souls. But whatever the source, the coming into present awareness of each thought is simultaneously the coming into being of the thinker," as James, practically quoting the non-dual sage Shankara, claims as a fundamental principle of psychology. The passing thought is itself the thinker, and psychology need not look beyond. This radical non-dual coming into present awareness emerges not from what James's friend Vivekananda called the assumed individuality delusion, but rather from a gap that gives more support for James's proposition of schismus as prime reality, and, as we saw earlier, leaving who the knower is wide open. The gap between thoughts, though elusive, is nonetheless omnipresent.